It's hard to believe that you're only 18 years old and you've been told you'll spend the rest of your life in this facility.
I believe it's possible I could be here the rest of my life. I'm working on my appeal to this day.
If you believe that you can or you can't, you're right. Whichever one you choose. If you believe you can do it, you're right. If you believe that you can't, you're still right. This is my sincere prayer. My name is Corey Frazier. I thank y'all for listening to my talk. I'm just a kid from Flint, Michigan. I pray that all y'all have a blessed day on purpose. And welcome to the Corrected Felon Podcast with me, Inspiretheblock, your host, your big homie, your favorite cousin, or the opinionated asshole. Because I do have some opinions that come from an asshole perspective. But once again, welcome to the Corrected Felon Podcast. I thank everybody for tapping in and rocking with your boy day in and day out. Also, make sure y'all subscribe, like, comment on this same channel, my new podcast, This Week in Rap Podcast, where I talk about everything or issues in the news connected to rappers or rap music. That's all that it is. I'm giving my 2 cents or my opinion to the news regarding rap music or rappers throughout the week. So make sure y'all tap in. And of course, you know, we talking all things Diddy. Who ain't? He got another lawsuit. But once again, that is for my new podcast, This Week in Rap Podcast. So make sure y'all tap in with me on that every week. All right. But once again, on this podcast right here, we like to talk about issues that is near and dear, not only to my heart, but that affects our community. And this one in particular that we're going to talk about today is juvenile serving life without parole. Now, it's no secret. If you're familiar with me, if you know anything about me, then you know I was a juvenile who was sentenced to life without parole. I spent over 17 years behind bars to where I was released at the age of 35. I'm going on 12 years free. But at one point in time, I was sentenced to 3 life without parole sentences in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And I don't believe that no juvenile during the time of their crime that they committed should be sentenced to die in prison. And this is something that I'm advocating for now here in Georgia, and we're going to get to that. But let's go over these 5 landmark cases that the United States Supreme Court decided started in 2005 all the way to 2021 regarding this very issue on juveniles serving life without parole. Now, the United States Supreme Court in a nutshell ruled that it was unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to die in prison. And they also allowed the states to interpret it the way that their decisions the way that they needed to, but also to make it fair and to make sure that these children at the time of the crime that they committed have an opportunity to be released from prison. So the very first case that they ruled on was back in 2005, Roper versus Simmons. The United States Supreme Court ruled that juveniles cannot be sentenced to the death penalty, writing that the death penalty is a disproportionate punishment for the young. Immaturity diminishes their culpability, as does their susceptibility to outside pressures and influences. So in Roper versus Simmons, the United States Supreme Court found it unconstitutional to sentence then at the time juvenile to the death penalty because of their immaturity. Like they said, the immaturity diminishes their culpability. So we're going to get into the mindset of juveniles in a little while, but I just want to go through step by step and give a synopsis or each case in a nutshell on the rulings that the United States Supreme Court made. Also in 2010, in Graham versus Florida. In Graham versus Florida, the court banned the use of life without parole for juveniles not convicted of homicide. The ruling applied to at least 123 prisoners, 77 of whom had been sentenced in Florida, the remaining in 10 other states. So in Graham versus Florida, the United States Supreme Court felt that it was unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to life without parole for non-homicidal cases. And once again, 77 of these cases was in fucking Florida. Like, damn, y'all was sentencing people to life without parole, young people to life without parole for carjackings, for robberies, for all kind of shit, even though they were violent felonies, but they wasn't murder. So the United States Supreme Court decided that, boom, that was unconstitutional. Here is one of the landmark cases that actually, and it's the center case out of all five of these, that actually shifted or changed the whole trajectory when it came to juvenile serving life without parole. And that is Miller versus Alabama and Jackson versus Hobbs. Now, in 2012, decided Miller and Jackson jointly, the United States Supreme Court held that for people under 18, mandatory life without parole sentences violated their Eighth Amendment. And if you know what the Eighth Amendment is, you have the right to not deal with punishment, uncruel and unusual punishment. That's what the Eighth Amendment is all about. No one should be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. And in 2012, deciding these cases, this is what the United States Supreme Court held. Here's another case back in 2016, Montgomery versus Louisiana. The Miller ruling affected mandatory sentencing laws in 28 states, and the federal government states inconsistently interpreted Miller's retroactivity. The question was settled by the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of 68-year-old Henry Montgomery, who had been in prison since 1963 and called a model member of the prison society. So the United States Supreme Court on January 25th, 2016, in a 6-3 decision, decided in 2012 that Miller versus Alabama applied retroactively to more than 2,600 individuals previously sentenced to life without parole as a child. So they used this guy by the name of Henry Montgomery to decide the case because he was 68 years old by the time of this ruling, but he had been in prison since 1963. If I'm not mistaken, he was 14 when he was sentenced to die in prison. So they used that case back in 2016 to say that, hey, it was that the Miller case is retroactive. You can apply that to any and every child that was sentenced to die in prison. And also the last case in 2021 was Jones versus Mississippi. In Jones versus Mississippi, the United States Supreme Court held that a separate and specific fact finding of permanent incorrigibility was not required to sentence a person who was under 18 at the time of their offense to a life in prison without parole. So that is a case dealing with the mindset of young people, but we're going to get into all of that, okay? Let's start off at the beginning, like I said, with Roper versus Simmons. Now, in whose right mind thought it was okay to sentence a juvenile to the death penalty? The United States Supreme Court found it unconstitutional, and they struck that down. And think about that for a second, man. Like that is very troubling and disturbing that in American society, we're okay with a 14-year-old being executed by the state. Like there's a lot of people in the country right now that does not have a problem with that. Right? If a 14-year-old commits a crime, there's people in our country who believes that this juvenile, even though they're 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, should still be subjected to the death penalty. Even though the death penalty has so many flaws in it to this day that we would put a child to death by the state. Think of the hearts and minds of the people. That if this is okay, that this shouldn't have even been a situation. But we're going to get into why it is. Because we also know that race has everything to do with the criminal justice system. So now, once again, we all can agree that that's fucked up for the most part. If you have any empathy in your heart, you know that that's wrong, regardless of the, how long it takes to execute these people. Because a lot of time when people sitting on death row, it takes years. We see them as the person they are now, not the crime that they committed when they were young. So the idea that if a 14-year-old commits a crime, even though that is horrible, it's bad, commits a murder, we feel like it's equal justice if we kill this person who committed this crime when they were young. That's sad that we live in a society, especially here in America, to where we'll do that. And like I said, so that was Roper versus Simmons, eliminating the death penalty for young people. Graham versus Florida was a case, once again, that people were sentenced to die in prison of non-homicidal cases, right? That was wrong. And then the Miller case, Miller and Jackson case, opened the door or changed the trajectory for young people who committed crimes at that time when they were young to be able to get out. And one of the things that we got to pay attention to is also the language in which these justices was using. For example, Justice Kagan emphasizes that judges must be able to consider the characteristics of young defendants in order to issue a fair and individualized sentence. Adolescence is marked by transit rashness and also the inability to access consequences. It's all factors in mitigating punishment for juveniles. Think about it. Like I got a 19-year-old son. And a lot of times when he do stupid shit, I know why he do stupid shit. I'm the parent. I'm 46 going on 47. So when he do something stupid, I know that it's all coming from his immaturity or his ability to assess situations, or his inability, let me take that back, to assess situations and respond to it correctly. Like we love to have or make children be adults, right? Until we actually need them to be an adult or a child. So once again, the mindset of young people has a lot to do with these decisions that was made by the United States Supreme Court. Also, too, in the Montgomery case versus Louisiana, Justice Kennedy, in his writing in a 6-3 majority, noted that the court in Roper, Graham, and Miller found that children are constitutionally different from adults in their level of culpability. Moreover, the severest punishment must be reserved for the rarest of juvenile offenders, those whose crimes reflect permanent incorrigibility. This is Justice Kennedy. Once again, saying that children in their level of thinking is totally different than adults. Also, too, in Jones versus Mississippi, Justice Kavanaugh upheld Miller and Montgomery's requirements that youth matters in sentencing. As such, as a mandatory life without parole sentence remains unconstitutional for youth, but also held that a separate and specific factual finding of permanent incorrigibility was not required to sentence a person who was under 18 at the time of their offense to life without parole. Youth matters in sentencing. This is Justice Kavanaugh speaking. So when we look at these particular cases, right, one of the things that these justices determined was the idea that these are actually children, and when they commit these crimes, they should be sentenced based on the idea that these are children and not be held to the same standards as adults. Also, too, Justice Kagan and Miller ruled that Alabama and Arkansas erred because a mandatory sentencing structure does not take into account the family and home environment. Now, what Justice Kagan is saying is that we got to take everything into consideration before we sentence these children to die in prison. She pointed out Kentrell Jackson and Evan Miller, both 14 at the time of their crimes, grew up in highly unstable homes. Even Miller was a troubled child. He attempted suicide 4 times. Now, think about that. Before the age of 6, I should put that in there. Miller was a troubled child. He attempted suicide 4 times, starting at the age of 6. So psychologically, something that was going on that led to him committing murder by the age of 14. Kentrell Jackson, family life was immersed in violence. Both his mother and his grandmother had previously shot other individuals. His mother and his brother were sentenced to prison. The defendant in Graham, Terrence Graham, had parents who were addicted to cocaine. Similar in Jones, Justice Sotomayor dissented, noting that Brent Jones was the victim of violence and neglect, that he was too young to escape. So what these justices are saying is that the environment in which these children come from has to be thought about or looked at when sentencing these children to die in prison. For example, myself, I come from a drug addiction household, also intertwined with alcoholism. My mother was a chronic crack user, even though she worked a job in General Motors. My stepfather, who I consider my father, was a stone cold alcoholic. So anytime that these issues are in the home, they're automatically going to affect the children. And then take into account my environment. This is inside my house. My mother is a drug user. My father is an alcoholic. My environment outside my home is gang banging, drug use, and selling. So of course, at a young age, I'm going to be influenced by these things. My mother and my father's drug and alcohol abuse trickled down to me psychologically. So by the time I start getting in the streets, I'm really responding to my home. I'm really looking at what's going on in my home and headed out to the streets to do all kind of crazy shit because I'm really escaping or seeking help from what's going on in the home. Now, I wasn't physically abused, right? But there was a lot of, in my opinion, emotional neglect. Like there weren't times that I can remember even as a child that my mother often told me she loved me. I can't remember that really growing up. Also with my father, I don't remember hugs. I don't remember intimate moments with my parents because my parents was either working or caught up in their habits. And that led me to the streets. So we all can see the factors that play in juvenile crime. Like juveniles just don't wake up one day and say, hey, we're going to go commit these crimes. There's factors, there's influence. For example, I talk about the music all the time, right? The music plays a big factor of influence to these children today. And it's sad, but it's true, right? It is what it is. We all have some kind of influence. People back in the days was influenced by Elvis Presley. Somebody was, right? You go to Vegas right now, you're going to see a bunch of fucking Elvis Presley impersonators. So it's not always a bad thing, but it's one of those things to where when you take hold of it, it grabs you and leads you in directions that you don't even know what's going to fucking happen down the end of the road. Right? That's life coming in the urban areas or the ghettos of America or the hood or the trenches, as they call it now. Right? These children are subjected to the harshest realities. Like they come from everything that we know is bad. Right? This is the environment. This is the area. This is the life in which they come from. Now, I'm not excusing the behavior, like I'm not excusing mine growing up. But what I am saying is that we got to make this right. Because right now in America, this is wrong. That we can sentence juveniles to die in prison. We treating them the same as we would an adult, but at the same time, we don't give them the responsibilities as an adult. We don't. We expect them to think as an adult when it comes to crime, right? But when it comes to different things in life, nah, we don't allow them to function like that. For example, a juvenile can't just jump in a car and drive. No, you can't do that. You have to be 16 years old, right? You can't vote. Just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to go vote. No, you got to be 18. Because at 16, society feels like you have some cognitive skills to where you can get behind the wheel of a car and you should be able to drive this car with no problems. We know that there's going to be some, right? But you shouldn't have no major big problems when it comes to driving a car, right? So they allow you to do this at 16. At 18, now they're feeling like, okay, you're part of our society now. You can make certain decisions, so we're going to allow you to vote. but they won't let you smoke. They won't let you drink at 21. And the reason why they won't allow you to do that is because they understand the psychological effects that it have on you. You shouldn't be doing this at 18. You shouldn't be smoking cigarettes at 18, right? Or until 18. But before they know. But now they didn't raise the age to 21. So you can't smoke weed until you're 21. You can't purchase alcohol until you're 21 because they understand, once again, the psychological effects that this has on children at a young age. You know? So, but this is the idea or the model structure of America that we feel like these are the rite of passages that these young people have to go to in order to be recognized or looked at as a citizen function on their own in this society. And it makes sense. I'm not against those particular steps and in which, you know, they're going. But at the same time, now when it comes to crime, we cannot hold children to the same standard. And one of the reasons why we can't hold children to the same standard, once again, like I said before, is because emotionally and mentally, they're just not there. Right? It's scientifically proven that your brain doesn't fully develop until about the age of 25. Right? The prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until the age of 25. And also, let's look at the function of that real quick, right? The function of the prefrontal cortex performs reasoning, planning, judgment, and impulse control necessary to function as an adult. Now, we know that young people don't have no impulse control. They're not, because they're so emotionally, right, or responding to every situation out of emotion, that they're not going to apply any logic or reason to every situation. They're not, because their brain hasn't been able to think deep enough to the consequences of their actions. That is honest to God truth. This is scientific evidence. It's scientifically proven that our brains, especially when we're that young, does not function on that level of as an adult. Like, I can step out of a car at a gas station, and one thing I'm going to observe the whole gas station. I'm going to try my best to look at everything that's going around, because I know the society in which we live in. Anything can pop off at any given moment. So if it does, I'm prepared for it. Right? Or at the very least, I want to be ahead of it when I see it's developing. But young people just jump out the car and go in the store without assessing nothing. Right? My son still, to this day, I keep telling him that the green garbage can is for trash. The blue garbage can is for recycle. Right? For boxes, things that we're going to recycle. I tell him to take out the trash. Where did he throw the trash at? In the blue garbage can, where the recycles go, because the recycles will not take the trash, and vice versa. But at the same time, I don't get overly upset and mad, because I understand that they just move through life vicariously. Like, we forget at one point in time we were the age. I know we all grown up and think we smart as shit, think we know everything, and think that we can rule the world because we're adults, we're in a certain age. Right? But we forget that we were once them. We made the same stupid mistakes. We did the same shit that young people do, or had did. So why should we be so why should young people be held to the same standards as us now? And I think that is bullshit, real bullshit, right? And I'm gonna get into it. Like, I might as well, because we talking about this issue of juvenile serving life without parole, and one of the issues that I know that it affects people that look like me. State courts are quick to send more young black boys to prison for life without parole than any other ethnic young boy. This fact finding. You can be mad at me all you want to. I give two shits. I give two fucks about it. I'm telling you the truth. And if the truth rub your asshole some kind of way, then let the truth keep making you tighten your asshole up. But I'm going to tell you the truth about these situations, because it is what it is. In 2012, the Sentencing Project released findings from a survey of people sentenced to life in prison as juveniles, and found that defendants in the above cases were not unusual. In the above cases, I'm talking about the Miller versus Alabama, Roper, the cases that I just mentioned earlier. 79% witnessed violence in their homes regularly. This is the truth. Like these individuals I mentioned earlier, Terrence Graham, Jones, Miller, Jackson, Roper, Montgomery, they come from very, very unfortunate homes. Like it also says, 32% grew up in public housing. Fewer than half were attending school at the time of their offense. I wasn't attending school at the time of my offense. I had dropped out. 47% were physically abused. 80% of girls reported histories of physical abuse, and 77% of girls reported histories of sexual abuse. Right? Racial disparities, like we're talking about. 62% of people serving juveniles life without parole among those for whom racial data are available are African Americans, while 23% of juveniles arrested for murder involve an African American suspect of killing a white person. 40% of juvenile life without parole sentences are for an African American convicted of this crime. So 40% of juvenile life without parole sentences are of African Americans convicted of this crime. White juvenile offenders with African American victims are only about half as likely to receive a sentence of life without parole. So we know that there's big differences, right? We know that there's big differences when it comes to black defendants and white defendants, or white juvenile defendants and black juvenile defendants. We know that the black juvenile defendant is going to receive the harshest penalty possible. Like, it is what it is. I mean, this is why I always talk about voting locally, the importance of local voting, because this is where all this stuff happens, right? The United States Supreme Court's rulings are the result of young people going through the system being treated unfairly to where they have to get involved and make rulings. But the thing about it is we can stop all this shit on the local level. We can make our voices heard on the local level if we step up like we do for the president, right? We got to get involved and engage locally, politically, because this is where you change all this shit on the local and state level. You don't change it. You can years later, but the way to stop all this is do it on the local and state level, because once again, juveniles, I know they do some horrible shit. Trust me, I speak on it, I read about it, and I see it every day. But it is my opinion and my belief that they still shouldn't be sentenced to die. They still deserve an opportunity to change and grow up and become adults. For myself, I've been out going on 12 years. I'm married, right? I've been married the whole time I've been out. I didn't have my daughter out of wedlock. I don't commit crimes, especially crimes against another person, their property or their possessions. Like, I'll never do no shit like that. I'll never rob nobody. I'll never kill nobody unless it's in defense of myself. I'll never drug traffic or sell drugs, right? I don't rob no bank. I'm not going to rob no gas station, no liquor store. I'm not going to rape nobody. I'm not going to rob a person. I'm not going to do nothing to another individual or their property or their possessions unless it's in total defense of my life. That's the only way I'm going to harm another individual. So I would like to consider or think to myself that I came out and I'm better. I'm not the same 17-year-old that when that verdict came down, hollered and screamed out and was carried out the courtroom. I'm not that same person back then. So why hold me to the same standards, or juveniles to the same standard as we are adults? That's wrong. And that brings me to Georgia, the state I live in right now. Georgia, man, is a motherfucker when it comes to this issue. Matter of fact, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi. And speaking of Georgia, the very state that I live in right now, since 2012, Georgia has seen a 100% increase in the number of juvenile lifers, young people under 18 sentenced to life without parole since 2012, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that the sentence should be reserved for the rarest of cases and investigation. And this investigation was by the Atlanta Constitutional has found. They have a 100% increase of juvenile lifers here in Georgia, right? Georgia is the only state to sentence more young people to life without parole after Miller restricted use of the harshest sentence before. The state has sentenced 31 young people to life without parole since 2012. Six have since appealed and received life with the possibility of parole. Of the roughly 100 juvenile lifers sentenced nationally over the past decade, more than half are Georgia and Louisiana, which is second in the nation during the period, according to Turner's Advocate Group. Georgia. What y'all doing? Y'all just okay with this? And then, once again, I'm going back to race, and this down here in Georgia. In Georgia, of the 31 young people sentenced to life without parole in Georgia since 2012, 25 or 81% are black. That's an increase from pre-Miller numbers when 60% of the nation's juveniles were black. So ever since Miller, they didn't made it a point. Man, fuck with the United States Supreme Court. That's what Georgia's saying. Man, fuck the United States Supreme Court. We don't give a fuck about the United States Supreme Court, any ruling they made. We gonna do what we want to do. And matter of fact, before they made this ruling, 60% of the state's lifers were black. Now we gonna uptick that. We gonna show y'all. So now 81% of juveniles serving life without parole here in Georgia is black. Right? 31 defendants sentenced after 2012 ruling found that roughly half of the cases stem from incidents that could be categorized as armed robberies and carjackings or reflect spontaneous acts of gun violence. Most of these they didn't even intend to kill nobody. That's what this report is saying. And by the way, I'm taking this information from a special report by Allie Gross, September 7, 2023. She did a report here in Georgia, juvenile life without parole. You can access that. She teamed up with the what is it? The American Atlanta Journal Constitution, Atlanta Constitutional Journal. One of the one. Atlanta Journal Constitution. Forgive me. It's a report. And then it said in one 2016 incident out of Columbus, Georgia, that led a life without parole sentence. For example, the victim was shot in the leg during a robbery and died of a blood clot 11 days later. And they still sentenced this young person to life without parole. Even though we can see clearly he never had any intentions of killing anybody. Shot a person in the leg, that's wrong. Yes, that is definitely wrong and should go to prison for some extent of time. But they still gave him a life without parole because this guy died 11 days later, as if he intentionally wanted to hurt somebody. Once again, I'm from the state of Michigan. Michigan is a motherfucker when it comes to sentencing juveniles to life without parole. Michigan, which had the second highest number of juvenile lifers, has seen over 180 juvenile lifers, over half of the total go home already. According to Turner, that's the report. Nationally, there were roughly 2,900 juvenile lifers when Miller decision came down. About 35% have been released. So Michigan is correcting the wrong that they should have done a long time ago, right? But it's good to see that they're doing that. They're actually rewriting this wrong. And I'm not mad at that at all, right? In response to the fact that no pre-Miller defendant has gone home despite being eligible for parole, the State Board of Pardons and Parole stated that decisions come down to public safety and risk of reoffending on an individual case-by-case basis. Now, keep in mind, this is Georgia, right? This is not the rest of the world, right? This is Georgia. I'm reading shit from Georgia. And this is coming from the State Board of Pardons and Parole, right? Steve Hayes, the communications director, he said, at the age at the crime commit data is undoubtedly a significant factor, but isn't and shouldn't be the reason to release an individual into the community, Steve Hayes said. Even though these 11 individuals are now pre-eligible, the board has determined their release from custody at this time is not compatible with the welfare of society. So let's look at it. Even though Georgia has reduced some of these sentences, right? They reduced 11 of the people that's been locked up, juveniles locked up, 11 of them. They reduced them to life with parole sentences. They still haven't released anybody. And they saying because at the time is not compatible with the welfare society. So what they're still saying is these children are dangerous. That's what they're still saying. They're still saying that these children are dangerous. So hell no, we're not going to release them. Not at this time. But these children have been locked up for a very, very long time. When is the time? Right? When is the time? But also, too, you can see across the country that the states are starting to make reforms, though. And I can applaud that, right? You can applaud that because that has to be done. You know what I'm talking about? It has to be done. For example, Texas, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Arkansas, which all have banned juvenile life without parole sentences. Like states are actually starting to do this, right? Think about it. Texas has banned it. North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, Arkansas, Wyoming, these are all red states that has banned juveniles receiving life without parole sentences. And that is a good thing. And like I said, across the country, there's a lot of states that is actually doing it, you know. And this is something that need to be taken on considerably because here in the South still, it's not good. It's not good. For example, West Virginia and the District of Columbia offer opportunity for release after 15 years. Now, these are structures that these states is putting into play so that when they overturn or ban these life without parole sentences, when these juveniles do commit these crimes or these violent acts, what they're saying is that, boom, we're not going to throw these children away forever. But you will, in West Virginia and the District of Columbia, be released after 15 years, right? Maryland, Nevada, New Jersey, and Virginia allow for the possibility of release after 20 years. Now, I'm not going to say that there should be a specific number. I'm not mad at these ones. Don't get it twisted. 15 and 20 years for murder, that sounds okay to me, right? I think that's reasonable, right? Some states may think that it's more, but I think that that's okay. I think that that's something that we need to collectively across the country agree on. First, let's ban sending juveniles to prison for the rest of their lives. And number two, let's have a sentencing structure in place so that when these events happen, they're going to happen. They ain't gonna lie about it. They're gonna happen based on the society in which we live in. And if you constantly follow my shorts, you'll see that I report on this stuff all the time. But this is a sentence when this stuff does happen, right? The District of Columbia, Washington State have extended Miller's guidance to people under the age of 25 and 21 respectfully, with the understanding that older and young adolescents alike should not be sentenced to die in prison. Additional legislation for people under 21 has passed elsewhere. So there are a lot of reforms going on, right? But we still need to ban it, right? We need to ban life without parole for juveniles across the country, right? And there's a number of states that have banned. Of course, we know Alabama has not banned it. Alaska has banned sentencing juveniles. Arizona has not banned it. Arkansas has banned it. California has banned it. Colorado has banned it. Connecticut has banned it. Delaware has banned it. The District of Columbia has banned it, which better known as DC. Of course, we know Florida ain't. They don't want to get rid of it, period. Georgia hasn't. Hawaii has. Idaho hasn't. I don't know what the fuck really going on up there. Illinois has banned it. Indiana has not. Iowa has not. Iowa has banned it. Kentucky has banned life without parole sentences for juveniles. Louisiana has not. Maine has not. Maryland has. Massachusetts has. Michigan, what the fuck is wrong with y'all? Michigan has not banned juvenile life without parole sentences. Michigan, highest juvenile life parole population in the nation. Why y'all ain't banned it? Minnesota has banned it. And you can find all this information on the net. I'm not going to go down each one, but I just want to tell y'all and wrap this up in this. And we're going to do it like this, okay? Once again, here on the Corrected Felon Podcast, juvenile serving life without parole or the opportunity or the ability to sentence juveniles to life without parole should be banned here in the country. I'm an advocate for that. I think that it's wrong. And I think that every American citizen needs to step up, and we need to fight this issue collectively together, because one day your child may do something based on the way that this world going. Your child may do something. Your child may commit one of these offenses in these states, especially one of these southern states that has not banned it. And you'll be an advocate for it. We have to understand that children are not adults, and that children should not be subjected to the harshest penalties as adults. If so, give children the same freedoms that they give adults. And then it'd be a different conversation. But right now in America, we need to ban life without parole for juveniles. And we need to work collectively on that. I think that's something we can accomplish in America. I'm going to stand on the front lines for it, especially starting down here in Georgia like I've been doing. And we need to get this shit banned. Once again, I want to thank everybody for tapping in with me to the Corrected Felon Podcast. I thank y'all, man, for tapping in and time out. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share it. Also, once again, my new podcast, This Week in Rap Podcast. Make sure y'all tap in with that. It's fun. I'm talking everything in the rap community, right? Reporting the news. And just rock with your boy. We're going to continue to build this content, build this platform, share it, turn on that notification. And until next time, I'm just a kid from Flint, Michigan. I pray that everybody have a blessed day on purpose.